So you mentioned the diluting of a brand. You all were kind of forced to dilute your brand in WCW, and you've been on the record saying that you didn't really want WCW Thunder. It wasn't something that you wanted to do. But you had also mentioned, I mentioned ahead of the curve, the idea of doing separate shows well before the WWE brand split. How far into that idea or planning were you? Was there a lot that you had on the table? Like, okay, this is going to be NWO, this is going to be WCW, because I remember we would sometimes see looks at like an NWO show, like on WCW Saturday Night, where they'd have some poor guy out there getting his ass whipped and somebody with a handheld camera while a masked ref would kind of control things. Do you have any insight onto maybe what you had planned or the ideas of differentiating those shows?
That's a really good question, Sean. And I get asked about that a lot. And I haven't really had to think about it until really the last 4 or 5 months, when people have, really asked me to try to, explain why, because I did when we were mandated. It wasn't a request. We fought it. I didn't fight it hard enough, as I probably should have in retrospect, but I don't have that luxury anymore. We were mandated. Ted Turner said, go do this.
Yeah.
TBS said, I'll put it on the air, but I don't want to pay for it. Nobody wanted to pay for it. We had to pay for it out of our own budget. We had to pay to put a show on a network. That's called a buy-on. Those bitches never work out. Buy-ons never work. But we did it because we had to. The initial thought, because by the time the Thunder mandate came to us and we resisted it for as long as we could, and Ted finally said, just go do it. By the time we pulled the trigger and started developing it, it's one of the reasons I brought in Bret Hart, because we saw the possibility coming down the road. It's one of the reasons we expanded the NWO beyond the point of making any logical sense at all, because we knew we had to have a roster ready when and if that SmackDown opportunity, matured. We had to be able to split Nitro and NWO, Thunder and WCW. Okay. About a third of the way through that process, after we signed Bret Hart, the timeline is not clear to me right now, and I don't have all the stuff written down, but probably a couple months or so, somewhere in there, after we brought Bret Hart in, is when, now with an AOL merger, coming into the fold, along with the Time Warner merger that I think had just been completed or was still in process at some levels, all of a sudden now we were forced to completely redo our budgets and our books in the middle of all that. And that was the beginning of what became a very frustrating and ultimately led to the end of WCW in many respects. And your listeners or viewers at this point, anybody that reads this, doesn't necessarily have to believe me, because obviously I'm trying to defend myself to a degree or explain a situation.
Ted Turner himself has spoken openly about how much he regrets that merger.
The merger, but there's a guy by the name of Guy Evans who wrote a book called Nitro,
Great
The Incredible Rise and Amazing Fall of Nitro, Ted Turner's Nitro. A guy who's a legitimate journalist. Mm-hmm. And I separate that. I don't mean to be derisive towards people who maybe didn't go to journalism school. It doesn't mean you can't write, think, and have an opinion about things. But here was a legitimate journalist who did the research and interviewed over 100 people who were associated with the decision-making processes outside of WCW, including outside of WCW, meaning Turner executives from the finance committee and the accounting and the legal departments, all of whom didn't report to me. They may have had a dotted line to me, but they reported to other people in the company. They are the ones who will substantiate a lot of what I'm saying in their own way. I'm not going to repeat myself and repeat me word for word. But so much of the problem starting before Thunder was really everybody within the, here, I'm going to try to get off this point because I know I talk too freaking much.
No. I like that. You said that last time, and I'm like, that gets my word count up. I'm thrilled with it.
I'm going to make you, brother, you could be able to take 3 more weeks off when this is over.
There we go.
The frustrating part of all of this for me was the fact that so many people that read and think they know about wrestling, and the guys that write about it that try to convince people that they know what's really going on when they don't or didn't, they weren't there. You can't imagine how in 1998, when I had a budget that had been approved in the fourth quarter of 97, I'm given that budget. First of the year, I start managing my business based on that budget. Halfway through the year, after I've made a lot of commitments, by the way, all within the parameters of a budget that was approved by Turner Finance, ultimately. Now, halfway through the year, they go, well, nah, we can't do that. We want you to do these 10 things instead, all of which had to do with increasing my expenses and cutting my budget and the ability to continue doing things at the level I was doing them before. And that's when the wheels started falling. They started wobbling at first, and then one would start really wobbling, and the rearview mirror was shaking, and all of a sudden that one falls off, and it's not long. Once you lose one wheel, the other three go pretty quick.
So by that point, when everything unraveled, had you communicated to any of the wrestlers, hey, we might be doing this, which what we know as a brand split now, like an NWO show, a WCW show? Because if so, I'm sure that some of those wrestlers would be like, working one TV a week? Sweet. That would be cool.
Well, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, yeah, it would have been better for some of the top talent that we relied upon. For example, when Thunder kicked into gear, we had, and that's one of the things I think that killed it immediately. So I have some pretty strong opinions about brand splits and how they have been unsuccessfully attempted ever since. A couple periods of, time when it looked like they might work, but for the most part, it's not been a successful concept anywhere, including WWE, in my opinion. But once you have talent appearing on one show and appearing on your top talent, let's just, for discussion, not argument, discussion, say that the top 25% of your roster draws 75% of your revenue, whatever that formula is. Your stars draw the money at the end of the day, no matter what the business is, whether it's music, TV, movies, it doesn't freaking matter. For the most part, your top stars draw 75 or 80% of your revenue. But when you see those same top stars twice a week, maybe I'll watch them tonight. Maybe I won't. If I don't watch them tonight, I'll watch them Thursday. Oh shit, I got busy Thursday. Before you know it, you're diluting your own talent pool, because you're overexposing them, and you're overexposing their stories. You're overproducing because you got to keep that story alive across two primetime shows instead of one. And I didn't know it. I didn't realize it while it was happening, or I would have possibly attempted to change it if I could have. But you're killing yourself. And it would have been easier for some of the top talent to go, okay, they would have felt better, because not because it's not that they minded working, but as a talent, I would much rather keep my stock high, my credibility high. I would rather keep my audience wanting me to come back so they could get more, as opposed to overindulging them.
Yeah.
They still would have worked just about as much. When they weren't at TV, they would have been in a house show. If they weren't on Thunder, they would have been somewhere else wrestling. It's not that they would have been home drinking freaking pina coladas and chasing their wives and girlfriends around a pool. They still would have been working. They just would have not been overexposed. Yeah, and finish that up. And then the opportunity that it would have created for, and I get a lot of heat, deservedly so. I'm not trying to evade it, deny it, make excuses for it. Yeah, a lot of that talent that we brought into the NWO was less than star caliber. Yes, they were. But those people would have been a part of a roster and had a more important role had there been a NWO exclusive show and a WCW exclusive show and two separate brands.
So because that aspect is so fascinating to me, because it was ahead of the curve. I assume they would have been produced a little bit differently, like the NWO show and WCW, because what we see now out of WWE are some very minor things between Raw and SmackDown, but largely they're produced the same. NXT, however, produced pretty differently, at least as far as a visual aspect.
Well, yes, but NXT has to be because of the nature of the venue that they produce it in, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be able to get a show even if you want one that looks and feels like Raw or SmackDown. And again, NXT was born, and still is, a developmental division of WWE, if you will. Yes, they're putting it on television, but this is younger talent, fresher talent. They get to try different things. They're not held to the same kind of standard. The filter is somewhat different than the filter on Raw and SmackDown. So take NXT off to the side. It's different because it has to be by virtue of what it is, and more importantly, where they shoot it. But if you look at Raw and SmackDown, different color lights. Right now, let's see, what time is it? What's the date today? June 1st? Yeah. Right now, fairly exclusive talent.
Yeah.
That could change in a week or a month or 6 months. I see that starting to happen already. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully I'm wrong. I've been wrong plenty of times.
Yeah.
So I'll invite this one. But what we're seeing right now is a show where talent, once again, can kind of go back and forth. We'll see how that works. Hasn't worked yet. But beyond that, beyond the semi-exclusivity of the talent currently, one show's red, one show's blue. It's the same people producing it. Of course it feels the same. It's the same people not writing it necessarily, but they're from the same team of people that are writing it, all of whom have been trained, developed, and made their way up the food chain, presenting story and content to the head filter. I mean, come on. Why would anybody expect it to feel different?
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. So, yeah, I'm glad that I was able to get some answers there, because I've always just wondered, like, what would that have looked like? You all clearly had a roster capable of being split in half and still maintaining good stuff. I mean, and that also makes me wonder, like, would some of the people that left, would they have left if there were more opportunities created between two brands and all that? And I think that would have been a very interesting period.
Well, I mean, that's a rabbit hole. That's a hypothetical rabbit hole. Once you go in, you can't come out.
Exactly.
Like Hotel California for rabbits. Who knows? Had the merger not occurred, had WCW, like so many other companies, another book, if people really want to understand, if you really, really want to understand and be able to talk about WCW, its impact, its history, the good, the bad, the good decisions, the bad decisions, read Guy Evans' book, and then read a book by an author by the name of Nina Monk, M-U-N-K. She wrote a book a long time ago called When Fools Rush In. And it was a great, and she's not a wrestling person. She's a journalist, but she wrote a story about the merger. So it wasn't just WCW that got hacked, slashed, and mistreated as a result of everybody's dream of increasing what's referred to as an EBITDA within their respective divisions, so that their stock options, would be worth even more money than they had been if they didn't quite meet those EBITDAs. It was all driven, not want to say by greed. It's the market. It's what people do in publicly held companies. But there was such a mad rush to get that EBITDA up to, and I think it was like 18 or 20%, which in previous years where we were considered to be successful, it was 10 or 11. And we had to do it by robbing Peter to pay Paul. And unfortunately, WCW and a lot of other companies were Peter and got robbed by Paul. Had that not occurred, there's a lot of dominoes that wouldn't have fallen the wrong way, in my opinion. But we'll never know if I'm accurate or not accurate, or full of shit or not. We'll never know.